going on here?
Making a tier list.
What are you doing?
I just put Hateful Eight into the F tier.
What are you doing?
Death Proof, 3.6 on Letterboxd. That's how I'm going to be covering these movies. I'm starting with the lowest rated on Letterboxd, working my way up to the highest, and then I'm going to put them on my own tier list. The problem with Death Proof is that, like most of Tarantino's other movies, it's kind of a throwback to 1970s exploitation and B movies. However, in this case, he doesn't add any of that extra great character work or super memorable scenes that elevates it beyond just being another exploitation movie. Death Proof just doesn't have that extra sauce that you see in a lot of Tarantino's other work, and what you're left with is something that is pretty much indistinguishable from any other exploitation movie that he's taking inspiration from. And on top of that, it also has a lot of the idiosyncrasies that I don't really like about Tarantino movies. For example, I would say about the first 15 minutes of Death Proof, probably about 40% of that has bare feet somewhere on the screen. I don't really know why he insists on doing that. It's like, are you trying to add crank material into your own movies, brother? And another thing, which I'm sure a lot of people have pointed out about Tarantino's scripts, is that sometimes it feels like the characters are not actually believable characters, and it's more so just Tarantino having a conversation with himself. And sometimes that really works. I like it in a lot of his other movies, but in this case, I don't think the characters are entertaining enough on screen to actually pull this off. And this movie does have some interesting stylistic choices. For example, the first half of the movie, it has this 1970s film grain with particles and damage to the film stock, and it does make it feel like you're watching this 70s grindhouse movie. But at the same time, the movie takes place in the 2000s, so it'll have a scene where a character will pull out a phone, and we're talking about like early 2000s phones here. They'll pull out their phone and they'll be texting, but it'll have this damaged film stock with particles and 70s film grain. It's a little bit anachronistic. I don't think it's a bad thing necessarily. It's kind of an interesting stylistic choice. And then Tarantino kind of ditches that 70s film grain look in the second half of the movie, which is much more contemporary looking. And yeah, it's tonally inconsistent, but I don't think it's necessarily in a bad way because each half of the movie is very different from each other. So I got to put Death Proof into Tarantino's worst tier. And keep in mind, I don't think any Tarantino movies are bad movies. Even his worst movies are still pretty decent, pretty fun to watch. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, 3.8 on Letterboxd. I really wish this movie would have focused in on one of the two main storylines. You have the Rick Dalton as a struggling actor story, and then you have the revisionist history Manson family stuff. I think this movie would have been better off if it focused more on the Manson family stuff. I think that had the best scenes in the movie. You had the Spawn Ranch scene and of course the ending. Those were the best scenes in the movie in my opinion. Some people might feel the exact opposite. They might not have liked the Manson family stuff and they wish the movie was more focused on the Rick Dalton. But my point is, it should have gone one way or the other instead of trying to balance both of them. The way it kind of plays out in the movie is that the Manson family stuff feels a little bit underdeveloped, even though it did have probably the best scenes in the movie in my opinion. It felt like it was lacking a little bit of exposition and buildup. It kind of requires you to be familiar with the history of the Manson family going in, and if you are, those scenes do hit really hard, but if you're not familiar with that stuff, then yeah, it just doesn't really set it up properly. And meanwhile, the Rick Dalton stuff, while there is a lot of really entertaining stuff there, sometimes it was a little bit slow and just going on for a little bit too long. But with all that being said, I still love Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It's a hilarious comedy. I think it's Tarantino's funniest movie. It has one of the best atmospheres in any Tarantino movie. I love the 1960s setting. He did such a great job of bringing that to life. The soundtrack is incredible, one of Tarantino's best. And overall, it's just a really solid comfort movie. I can just throw on Once Upon a Time in Hollywood every 6 months or so, and it's always just a nice comfort movie to go back to. I love living in this world vicariously through the characters. So I'm gonna put this into the great tier. Jackie Brown, 3.9 on Letterboxd, and I will say this, Jackie Brown is one of my favorite characters in any Tarantino movie because, yeah, she does have the cool badass factor that you see in a lot of other Tarantino characters, but she feels the most believable as an actual person and not just a caricature. She's not just being cool 100% of the time. There's a lot of little details that flesh her out as a character and just make her feel more believable. Yeah, in the high pressure, high intensity moments, that's when she's being really cool and badass. But in between that, there's just a lot of stuff that makes her feel more believable. Just as a little example, when she's in the bail bonds office waiting for Ordell to come, she's practicing pulling out her gun, she's setting up the lighting. You can tell that she's nervous. She's acting how a normal person would act in this highly stressful situation. However, when shit does start to go down, that's when Jackie Brown locks in, and she's also got a lot of really great one-liners. My favorite one is when she tells Ordell, "Shut your raggedy ass up and sit the fuck down." And I can't really do it justice, but Pam Grier absolutely nailed the performance. And this is saying a lot, but this might be Tarantino's best soundtrack. For me, it's right up there with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Those are my two favorite Tarantino soundtracks. That's saying a lot because music supervision is one of those things that Tarantino always gets it right. And it's got a really clever plot, a great ensemble cast of characters. The only thing I think that's holding Jackie Brown back a little bit, it doesn't have some of the excitement that you get in a lot of other Tarantino movies. It's not quite as funny as some of his other movies, but I still think it's great. I'm actually going to put it ahead of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Hateful Eight, 4.0 on Letterboxd. I really think that this movie could have used another round of editing with the script, and it definitely could have used more work in post-production. They really needed to trim down that final cut. There's a lot of filler, a lot of bloat in this movie. I think that is true of a lot of Tarantino movies, but in the case of Hateful Eight, it doesn't have enough juice to really make up for it. I can let it slide with some of Tarantino's other movies because those are just so exciting and they have such high highs. Hateful Eight, it just felt needlessly long without enough redeeming qualities to make up for it. And look, I love whodunit mystery type of movies, and I think that style is pretty perfect for Tarantino. But in this case, I don't think the character work was nearly as strong as it is in some of his other movies. It's still good, don't get me wrong. There's some really nice characters in this movie. I mean, nice is probably the wrong word. You know what I mean? There's some really interesting characters in this movie, but they just didn't really compare to some of his other work. And I don't know, it just kind of fell a little bit flat for me. And also the movie totally lost me at the point where Tarantino hops on the mic and starts doing his big exposition dump voiceover. At that point, I checked out, and the mystery to me wasn't really that satisfying. And this movie definitely still does have a fair share of great moments here and there. It's one of Tarantino's most well-shot movies, so I can see why a lot of people really love Hateful Eight. It's just not really for me. I gotta put this into Tarantino's worst tier, and I'm actually gonna put it below Death Proof. I think Hateful Eight is a more well-made movie than Death Proof, but at the end of the day, I would rather watch Death Proof again. Kill Bill, 4.2 on Letterboxd, and I'm considering this all as one movie. I guess that's how Tarantino considers it, as one movie. Some people might disagree with that, but whatever. And this is definitely one of Tarantino's stylistically most fun movies to watch, just because it's so crazy and all over the place, especially the whole Crazy 88 action sequence. That whole sequence with O-Ren, that whole segment of Volume 1, I could probably watch that on repeat. And one of my favorite things about this movie are some of the character introductions, especially when there's just like this dramatic slow-mo walking and with like this music playing in the background. It could be very cheesy, but I don't know. I just love it, especially when O-Ren Ishii and her whole squad are just walking down the hallway and it's playing that. I love that scene. It's just so, it's cheesy, but it's awesome. And Tarantino went all out with this movie, had the martial arts influence, some of the spaghetti western, even an anime sequence in there. I mean, it's very all over the place. You could even say the movie's a little bit gimmicky because Tarantino is just kind of making a bunch of references to all these movies he likes and compiling it all together. Narratively speaking, I guess it's sort of a solid revenge film. However, some of the writing, in my opinion, I don't know, Tarantino was just trying a little bit too hard. Some of the dialogue is just a little bit cringe. And I've heard Tarantino describe this movie as a movie that the characters in Pulp Fiction would go to the movie theaters and watch. So it's almost like a movie within a Tarantino movie. So it's like Tarantino going even extra overboard with his style. And I guess it kind of works for pure entertainment value, but I don't think the screenwriting in Kill Bill holds up to a lot of Tarantino's other scripts. And sometimes, yeah, like the stylistic direction, it's fun to watch, but a lot of the times it just feels kind of gimmicky and doesn't actually contribute that much to the storytelling. It's more so there just because it's cool. So I'm going to put Kill Bill into the good tier. Some people might think that that's blasphemous. I think it's a good movie, okay? I'm not saying I don't like Kill Bill. I do like it. I think it's a good movie. I just don't think it's as good as some of Tarantino's other work. Reservoir Dogs, 4.2 on Letterboxd. And I think it's insane that some guy went from being a video store clerk to making Reservoir Dogs, didn't go to film school, pretty much just taught himself how to make movies, and he just comes out the gate with Reservoir Dogs. I understand that he was already a screenwriter before that, and he did make his own film that never really got released, but this is his directorial debut. This was the main introduction to Tarantino as a writer and director, and it's insane because I think this is still, to this day, arguably Tarantino's most flawless movie. It's just super tightly paced, all killer, no filler. It doesn't have some of the excesses that you see in a lot of Tarantino's other movies. It's just a really solid, pretty much perfect movie for what it is. So I'm actually going to put Reservoir Dogs into the great tier below Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And I know I was just saying that it's his least flawed movie, and I stand by that, but that's just personally how I view movies. I would rather watch a movie that has some of my favorite scenes, even if the movie overall has some flaws. I would rather watch that than a movie that doesn't really have any low points, but it doesn't reach the same peaks either. Django Unchained, 4.3 on Letterboxd, and I've always loved this movie, but upon recently rewatching it, I love it even more now. And in case any of you guys are wondering, no, my channel is not named after Django Unchained. It's named after my childhood cat. Okay, I didn't really put a lot of thought into it, but anyway, I love Django Unchained. It's just an awesome movie. And the thing with Django Unchained that a lot of people might not like about it is that it kind of breaks some of the rules when it comes to Hollywood screenwriting, especially when it comes to the overall narrative structure. If you really think about it, this movie is very weirdly structured. If you think about like the first like almost an hour of the movie is basically just this origin story for Django, but it's pretty much just a prologue to the rest of the movie. But that's not even in a bad way because it still feels absolutely essential. And then once you get to the main meat of the story, which doesn't really start until almost an hour into the movie, it has this really nice, well-executed, slow buildup of tension, and it's building up to this big epic climax. But all of a sudden, then it reverts back, and then it goes back to another buildup to a second climax. It's a very weird structure for a movie, and a lot of people might not like that about this movie, but I think Django Unchained totally gets away with it, just because it's so awesome and pretty much all of it feels essential. I think it's okay to break the rules of Hollywood screenwriting as long as you're in good hands and you know what you're doing. And I think Tarantino knew what he was doing here. Great idea for a movie, by the way. The entire concept of this movie is amazing, and it was executed so well with these amazing characters with great acting performances. The only time that this movie starts to drag on just a little bit is in the last 30 minutes of the movie after Django gets captured. But I can forgive it just because the rest of the movie is so awesome, and it ends on such a high note with the very ending. And I also really like Django's character arc in this because we see at the beginning of the movie, Christoph Waltz's character is sort of Django's wise mentor, and he teaches him how to be a bounty hunter. But we're also seeing Christoph Waltz's character, he's always smooth talking his way out of these sticky situations. And then by the end of the movie, it's actually Django that has to be the one to smooth talk out of a sticky situation. And I'm specifically referring to when he's dealing with the Australian mining company. And that might be the weakest scene in the movie, but only because Quentin Tarantino did his usual cameo into the movie. We all know he's not the best actor. I think out of all of Tarantino's movies, this is the worst cameo he's done. His acting performance is just kind of ridiculous. But at the end of the day, I still appreciate what they were going for with Django's character arc. And I think it overall worked, even if Tarantino's cameo wasn't the best. And dude, some of the anachronistic music supervision choices in this are kind of awesome. I think it injects a lot of life into the Western genre. Some people might not like it as much, but I don't know, dude. When Django starts dual wielding pistols and then a Tupac song drops, like, that's just fucking awesome, dude. I love it. I know some people might not like it, but I thought it was really cool. I thought the soundtrack, even though it is very anachronistic, I think it just made the Western genre more fun to watch. I like that take on the genre. So even if this movie does have a lot of flaws, I still gotta put this into Tarantino's best tier. This movie is just awesome. Pulp Fiction, 4.3 on Letterboxd, and I was surprised to see that this wasn't Tarantino's highest rated movie, but yeah, I'm guessing by process of elimination, you know what's coming next. But I mean, yeah, it's Pulp Fiction. It's an absolute classic for a reason. I think this is Tarantino's best script. It's one of his funniest movies. I don't think it's quite as funny as Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but other than that, I think it is his funniest movie. It's got some of the most memorable characters, one of the most quotable movies of all time. So many scenes that are just so iconic, and they're memorable for a reason, because this movie Definitely probably Tarantino's weirdest movie. And one of my favorite aspects of this movie is the diverging path in life that Jules and Vincent go on. And the way that this movie presents it is so great, the non-linear storytelling. Now, in some cases, some people might think the non-linear narrative would be a bit of a gimmick, but in this case, I really don't think it is. I think the way that this movie is structured non-linearly really adds so much more weight to the whole storyline about Jules and Vincent, especially the way you see the movie end with Jules and Vincent walking out of the diner. And at that point, that's when the whole movie kind of comes together and you see the greater context of what the movie was going for. And the movie kind of has three major vignettes or subplots, I guess. And I think all three of them are really great. The weakest one is probably the one with Bruce Willis, the gold watch one. But even if it is the weakest of the three, I still think it's really great. And it's definitely the weirdest one. That whole storyline, it does get super weird when you really think about it, but in a good way. I think the only real flaw in this movie is Tarantino's acting cameo. He's just not really that good of an actor, and it did not age well. Like, his scene in this movie is just not very good, but I don't think it really detracts that much from this movie. So I'm going to put this into Tarantino's best tier, and I'm actually going to put this ahead of Django Unchained. Inglourious Basterds, 4.4 in Letterboxd, and similar with Django Unchained, I've always loved this movie, but upon recently rewatching it, I love it even more now. And I think out of all Tarantino movies, this one really encapsulates what makes Tarantino such a great writer and director, is that he kind of takes these goofy exploitation movies and B movies and stuff like that from the 70s, but he injects this great character work and some of these beautiful scenes. It's almost like he's mixing together the fun and awesome elements out of a 70s B movie, but he's sort of adding more prestigious filmmaking kind of stuff here and there just to make you care more about the story and the characters. And it just works so well to elevate it beyond just being another exploitation movie, but he still keeps the fun aspects from those movies that he's taking inspiration from. When you really think about it, Inglourious Basterds is a pretty silly and goofy movie. It's about the film industry winning World War II. I've heard Tarantino describe it as, well, this is what would have happened if my characters actually existed. It was like, I don't know, that seems a little bit far-fetched, but it's so fun. Like, the overall structure of the movie, it could just be like, yeah, this is like a dumb, fun movie, but Tarantino elevates it so much with these amazing characters and so many great tension-filled scenes. Pretty much every chapter in this movie, there's 5 main chapters, I think, maybe 6. I don't know if I'm remembering correctly, but every single chapter of this movie is just incredible. There's so many well-written and well-directed scenes. They go on for so long, but they just keep on building that tension. The character work is amazing, and a lot of the praise and acclaim seems to go to Christoph Waltz for playing Hans Landa, and rightfully so, because he absolutely crushed it. He was amazing in this movie, but I think that Brad Pitt as Aldo Rain was as much a part of why this movie is so good as Christoph Waltz. Aldo Rain is an awesome character. He's so funny. He just says the dumbest shit. Obviously, everyone knows like the Gorlami and Arrivederci. Like that shit's funny as fuck, but there's just like so many little one-liners that he has. Like, they're just kind of subtly funny. Like, I don't know. I just really like him. He's like, well, I speak the best Italian. Like, I don't know why. Everything he says, it's not even that funny of a line. He just says it in a funny way. So yeah, I just love this movie. I'm going to put it into Tarantino's best tier, and I'm going to put it above Django Unchained and behind Pulp Fiction.